Welcome to Eduimagica, the medical mystery education hub. Today we'll learn about the histology of gastrointestinal tract. Now before beginning the video, if you are new to our channel, then make sure to subscribe. And if you like our video, then do hit the like button and share with your friends. Let's get started. Now let's talk about the introduction of the GIT. The GIT or the alimentary canal is a long muscular tube that begins at the oral cavity and ends in the anus. Different parts of the tract are specialized to perform different functions, and hence structural modifications are seen in various parts of GIT. Now let's talk about the general structure of GIT. The structure of the alimentary canal from the esophagus up to the anal canal shows several features that are common to all these parts. We shall consider these common features before examining the structure of individual part of the canal. The esophagus and the anal canal are merely transport passage. The parts of the alimentary canal from the stomach to the rectum is the proper digestive tract, responsible for the digestion and absorption of food. The absorption of secretory fluids is an important function of large intestine. The walls of the oral cavity and the pharynx are partially bony and partially muscular. From the upper end of the esophagus up to the lower end of the canal, the alimentary canal has form of a fibromuscular tube. Now, before studying the histology of the gastrointestinal tract, we must know the anatomical planes in human. There are three basic planes in zoological anatomy. We have the sagittal, coronal, and the transverse plane. A human in the anatomical position can be described using a coordinate system with the z-axis, x-axis, and with the y-axis. The z-axis going from front to back, x-axis going from left to right, and the y-axis going from up to down. And in this case of the study of histology of the GIT, we have taken a transverse section or the transverse plane section to study the layers of the gastrointestinal tract. Now let's begin with the layers of the gastrointestinal tract. First we will look at the innermost layer, the mucosa. The mucosa is composed of the lining epithelium, the Laminar Propria, and the Muscularis Mucosa. The lining epithelium is columnar all over the gut except in the esophagus and in the lower part of the anal canal, where it is stratified squamous. This stratified squamous epithelium has a protective function. In these situations, the cells of the columnar epithelium are either absorptive or secretory. The factors contributing to the absorptive surface are the considerable length of the alimentary canal, the presence of the numerous folds, the formation of the crypts, and in the small intestine, the mucosa bears numerous finger-like projections that project to the lumen known as villi. And the factors leading to the secretory functions are the presence of the glands, and embryologically, the epithelium is derived from the endoderm. Now let's talk about the Laminar Propria. Laminar Propria is made up of collagen and reticular fibers embedded in a glycosaminoglycan matrix. Some fibroblasts, blood capillaries, lymph vessels, and nerves are seen in this layer. Prominent aggregation of the lymphoid tissue as well as the scattered lymphocytes are present in the Laminar Propria. Some of these lymphocytes or the lymphoid tissue extends into the submucosa and is called as gut-associated lymphoid tissue. Now let's talk about the Muscularis Mucosa. This is a thin layer of smooth muscles that separates the connective tissue of the Laminar Propria from the submucosa. It consists of an inner layer in which the muscle fibers are arranged circularly around the lumen and outer layer in which they run longitudinally. The Muscularis Mucosa extends into the mucosal folds. Now let's talk about the next layer, Submucosa. This layer is form of the loose areolar tissue that connects the mucosa to the Muscularis Externa. It loosens, permits the mobility of the mucosa over the muscle. Numerous blood vessels, lymphatic vessels, and the nerve fibers traverse the submucosa. Smaller branches arising from them enters the mucous membrane. Now let's talk about the next layer, the Muscularis Externa. Over the greater part of the gut, the Muscularis Externa consists of smooth muscles. The only exception is the upper part of the esophagus, where this layer contains striated muscle fiber. Some striated muscle fibers are also closely associated with the wall of the anal canal. The muscle layer consists of an inner layer of circularly arranged fibers and an outer layer of longitudinal layer. Both layers really consist of spirally arranged fasciculi that turns to this spiral being compact in the circular layer. The arrangement of the muscle fibers shows some variations from region to region. In the stomach, an additional oblique layer is present. In the colon, the longitudinal fibers gather to form prominent bundles known as tinea coli. Localized thickening of the circular muscle fibers forms sphincters that occlude the lumen of the gut. For example, the pyrrolic sphincter present at the pyrrolus part. We have the internal anal sphincter surrounds the anal canal, and a functional sphincter. Now let's talk about the outermost layer, the serous and the adventitial layer. Covering the muscular cord, there is a serous layer which is outermost layer of the alimentary canal. This layer is merely the visceral peritoneum that covers most of the part of the GIT. In some places where a peritoneal covering is absent, the mucosal coat is covered by adventitial layer that is made up of connective tissue, that is, for example, oval part of the esophagus. Now let's talk about the nerve plexus present in the gut. The gut is richly supplied with nerves. A number of nerve plexus are present as follows. We have the mesenteric plexus known as the Oravex plexus that lies between the circular and the longitudinal cords of Muscularis Externa. Then we have the submucosal plexus, also known as Meisner's, lies in the submucosa near the junction with the circular muscle. And we have the third plexus that is present near the Muscularis Mucosa. The nerve fibers in these plexus are both efferent and afferent. The efferent fiber supplies the smooth muscles and glands. Postganglionic neurons meant for these structures lies among the nerve fibers, forming the plexus. Now this is also a different diagram to study the histology of the gastrointestinal tract. Here in the mucosa, you can see the gastric glands, and in this mucosa, an additional layer is present in stomach known as the oblique layer. Now let's talk about the summary of the whole thing. The wall of the tube is made up of the following layers from inner to outside. The innermost layer is mucosa membrane that is made up of lining epithelium, Laminar Propria and Muscularis Mucosa. And the secondmost layer is the Submucosa. The third is the Muscularis Externa, and the outermost is the serous or the adventitial layer. This was all about the histology of the gastrointestinal tract. Thank you for watching a video on histology of gastrointestinal tract. You can follow us on different social media platforms. Link for the same is in description below. Do subscribe to our channel and hit the like button.